we're more comfortable solving ambiguous problem sets. And so I'd like to think that my experience in being a professional guitarist or a songwriter or a music producer has kind of helped me deal with kind of the brick wall of here's the problem and here you have to figure out how to chisel away to build the statue, you know? Um, and I think I've always been very, as I've gotten into this industry, I've realized how how important it is to sort of strengthen that muscle. And you know, obviously that's like a critical thinking thing. That's how you can deal with a variety of variables and make something out of those variables. But I would say that yeah, there's definitely a common thread between creatives and people who are trying to build new businesses. And yeah, I mean, right now I mainly sit in the business building space. Like, can we build an app? Can we build an offering that will create a change in the market? Can we design a service that will create a change in the market or will be adopted? So those are very creative activities. They're not cookie cutter activities that you can read a business book on always, especially in the startup space. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Yeah. I think that's actually really interesting. I really love that that term, solving ambiguous problem sets, because yeah, that's really what a lot of new technology and just starting a new company, entrepreneurs, it's always new problems. Otherwise, it wouldn't, there would be nothing to benefit from. So yeah, so solving ambiguous problem sets. And you said you got your first job in tech from the subway. Was that someone that you just ran into, or were you performing, or?
Pretty weird. It's pretty weird encounter. So I had professional musician. I was living in Philadelphia. I was commuting back and forth, actually crashing in Jeremy Lawrence's crib, a mutual friend of ours, because I wanted to move to New York because I knew that in New York the tech scene was growing, and that I knew I wanted to create a record label, and I knew that if I wanted to do that, I would definitely get an education in one of the business capital of the world's, learning things from people that live there. So I got this internship for free. I would commute back and forth, and I remember there was this guy on the Bolt bus that would come back and forth from Philly, and he would always be on the phone with his AirPods or whatever, and he would be like doing some sort of consulting work. So this guy was super annoying on the bus. He would always be on his like consulting calls and stuff, and I'd be like, this guy, it's like 8 a.m. He needs to like chill out, you know, like I'm trying to sleep on my way to New York for my free internship. So fast forward 4 months, I see this guy on the L train, like waiting at the Larimer stop in Williamsburg. And I'm like, that's the guy from the Bolt bus. Like, that's the guy. And I was kind of like new to New York, kind of green, like super talkative. And I went up to him and I was like, hey, like, aren't you from Philadelphia? And he was like, I am. And I was like, like, what brings you to New York? Like, I remember seeing you on the bus, and we got chatting, and he was building a consulting company, building startups, startups that had raised $250,000 to like $500,000. And I was already kind of getting myself acquainted with the startup language on like investments, and like when you raise 250K and you're building a software company, who do you hire? Like,
Mm-hmm.
is it a designer first, or is it a CTO, or like all these things, right? And so I was kind of like had all this language I was working on already, and I tried to use it in the conversation. And, you know, being a hustler and being in New York, I sent this guy an email after he gave me his card, and I started bringing him opportunities actually. Um, I was just out there talking a lot. And so he recognized this thing in me that I wanted to get to the next step. And he offered me an apprenticeship for $200 a week or something. I think it was really bad. It wasn't that great, but it was an amazing learning opportunity. And I did it. And at the time, actually, I was friends with the founder of Venmo, and he was teaching me all these things at the same time. And I was doing a barter with him where I would teach him music production. We did a trade. I'm like, if I teach you music production, you have to teach me how a tech company works. And most of the time, we just partied. But I will say that, you know, at that point in my life, being like 26, or I was I always think it's important, and you're trying to make a career change, is definitely you need to pitch your hand out first and take a little like calculated and small risks, because there's a lot of learning that you can do in that process. And I'm happy with the decisions I made back then, because it gave me an incredible education in a short amount of time, from very qualified people. So that's kind of how I got started. And I remember Ikram from Venmo saying, "Once you're in, you're in. Like once you're in, you're in. Then you can do what you need to do to get to the next level." So, I do want to mention that the 2 years before that, I sent out hundreds of resumes in Philadelphia, and I went to art school. I went to University of the Arts in Center City, and I had a bachelor's in music. Um, and I was competing with Wharton Penn grads and all these folks. So there was only so many opportunities, and a lot of people were passing me over because I had an arts degree. Um, so I was very hungry to get that soft spot opportunity where someone wasn't looking at my resume, someone was really looking at my intellect through conversation, and saying, well, I'll give this kid a shot, And I look for people like that often, because I don't come from that business school pedigree, you know?
Yeah.
So
Wow, that's great. Yeah. You mentioned
that was a lot of
Ikram.
information. Sorry.
No, that's cool. I mean, I think the thing is, a lot of people here probably are in a transition from one career path to another. So it's like, it's great to hear that. I think that's sort of that's a pretty common story when you're transitioning, or if you're like, you're in your second career path. But yeah, it's always about getting that first shot. So I guess the next question I'll ask before we kind of just totally open it up would be, where do you see like the future trends in tech, and actually, I don't know if we got to do this yet, but could you say a little bit more about what the Department of Sound is doing? Because I think
Yeah.
it's really fascinating.
Department of Sound. So I came into Department of Sound last May, and my friend started this group. It's focused around music education, and basically what we're trying to do is build modern curriculum and modern tools for music education institutions. So we're talking like public schools, private schools, after school programs, the music school down your block that teaches kids how to play violin, guitar. They're being a music producer, and being actually, I've also was a music educator from when I was 20 to 26. We're seeing with the growth of technology and the ability to make electronic music that you don't necessarily need, obviously, you don't need to be able to read music to be a great musician. A lot of our favorite musicians don't read music. And so, what we're getting at here is that with Department of Sound, we've built curriculum that is accessible from students from all economic backgrounds. Anyone who has access to an internet connection can start creating on these platforms. And the platform we mainly build on is called Soundtrap. And my job is to figure out how to get the service and the technology into the school systems. And so there's a lot of there's like a business design. It's kind of a sales problem, but it's also a language. It's also a language problem. It's also, how do we craft the service in the right way and design the user flow so that students can actually have an effective experience. So there's all kinds of problems that I'm trying to work on. And we're like not a lot of nonprofits. We're a small team. We have a decent amount of funding, but it's finite, and we have to hit our milestones in short and midterm. So that's kind of the world I've been in for a year. I never expected to be there, but I'm loving it, and I'm having a lot of fun in the process of it.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think like the idea of how education now is so like decentralized, and everyone's used to taking remote classes. It's really interesting how music education, there's a tech solution for that, and you could teach 100 kids the same curriculum in 100 different schools. So I think that's really cool what you guys are
Yeah,
doing.
and like the interesting thing about it is that, and one thing I'll say is, like, we might have a lot of designers. I'm not sure, like, I'm curious to see like what y'all are, your skill sets, and what you guys are working on in this chat, or like what your current gigs are. But But the reality is like design thinking is really important in all aspects of everything. So like when you're building a service, like the way you word this, like the way you describe the service or even literally talk about the service to a teacher, like you have to use the same language that the teacher uses, or the teacher, it's going to go over their head because they might be 60 years old and aren't even that great on email. So like the aspect of like how do we improve the design of what we do and how we approach this is a very creative problem set. And you can argue that in any type of job, like how you word, if you have a restaurant, like how you word the cocktail on the menu too, like is that going to get people to buy it? Like so, but it does kind of put the creative bits first to be like, here's the ambiguous problem. How do we deduce what the right, how do we do, build the activities and work through this to deduce like what the better solution is. So, um, yeah,
That's great. So I'm just gonna ask this question, and then I'll get your response, and then I think anyone can chime in because I think it's kind of like a big question, and I'm assuming there's a lot of people in here who are UX designers. So, like, as technology becomes sort of the primary medium for human interaction, human
sure.
togetherness, what kind of responsibility do you think designers have and people in the tech space have to, take on what is kind of now like a massive part of everyone's day-to-day life? When you're designing these, solving these problems, do you think there's a sort of different uh, level of responsibility that we need to start
Yeah,
taking?
that's an interesting question. I mean, I remember asking myself this question when I was younger, when we were building like notification apps and being like, hey, do we actually know how this is going to affect someone? Like, I remember asking one of those questions in a big meeting. And I remember some folks older than me in that meeting were like, we don't know the answer to that, and I'm not saying that I'm like on my high horse, but I mean, like, I think there's got to be more of a longer tail sort of chat when you're building technology to be like, who are who is this going to actually affect? Like what, like for example, if we build technology for children, right? Like we constantly have to ask ourselves like, how is this going to affect the user? Like, you know what I mean? And like, and so there's some of the answers we'll have to those, we'll have answers to some of those questions, and others we'll have none. But I think making sure that we're not abandoning those questions as we develop the technology, because there are implications to people using technology. It's not like, it's not like there's no friction with people using technology, you know. So I mean, that's always been kind of on my mind, like trying to be a part of ethical projects. And that's a really tough one, because I was actually on the phone with a friend. We were talking about the no code, a lot of the no code stuff that's
Mhm,
happening, right?
mhm,
And so there's a lot of businesses coming out where there's and I'm really interested in this space right now, but obviously what that does is that cuts people out of jobs. Like there's a lot of people that are going to lose jobs because technology is being automated. And so there are different types of problems, like the technology curve is going to do this, and that means that the people that are informing the technology are generally going to be able to keep money, like keep making money from it. But the people, there's always going to be not a loser, but there's going to be people that are going to be in the losing end of that curve, you know? And so they're all different types, and I'm constantly trying to keep a couple of them fresh in my mind. So at least I have like a compass, um, that I'm not just operating blindly just to make money in tech,
mhm.
you know. But it's very hard. It's very hard to pin those things down.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's the business incentives are always gonna push you towards cutting out as many people who need to be paid as possible. Um, yeah. So if anyone else wants to just chime in and sort of like share maybe how they're thinking about just the increased responsibility that designers have now as tech sort of keeps eating everything. If anyone wants to share anything, either like in the chat or
In my course, we were actually told that we had to design for accessibility. We have to make sure that we are keeping in mind what people's needs might be. For instance, people might have uh, visual disabilities like eye colors, not eye color, color blindness, excuse me. And we have to design for that because it's important for everyone to be included.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. It's a it's like designing a park or a mall. You know, it has to be accessible for everyone. Um, yeah. Anyone else? Any thoughts on that?
My name is Jor. I'm also in a boot camp. Michelle, you mentioned you were in a boot camp for UX. Uh, Actually, today we just presented a present. We had a presentation that we went over, and I think the core of the presentation was just like always keep the user like in the middle of everything, even when explaining like your process, even diving into your prototypes. Like always making sure you're going back like we created this feature because this user said XYZ or this set of users. So yeah, it's pretty cool just to be able to always keep that in mind. And like I don't know, it just makes it easier, to be honest.
Yeah. I have actually one thought on that too, and we have a lot of designers in here, UI, UX, front end. You know, being on the business side, I also want to put this out on the table too, just to make sure. And I'm sure that there's people who have varying degrees of experience with this, but there is a point where I've always thought of a company being built like maybe let's talk about a software company or a startup. It's business, product, and then engineering, and then like maybe the three-headed monster. You know, there's sometimes obviously more departments than that, but there are business decisions um, that require that are informed by product and engineering, and then sometimes there is like the mantra is in UI UX is the user is in the middle of everything because you guys are solving user problems, right? You're trying to build something that facilitates and solves a problem for a real person, right? And so, but the interesting thing is as a company grows, there are trade-offs in how businesses have to, like for example, like the chat bot, right? Like there's a moment in time where the chat bot helps and it's technology to help a user solve its problem, but sometimes it doesn't solve the problem. And so business sometimes becomes at odds with technology or at I'm sorry, to make money and to make a company profitable. There's like these defining moments where a UI UX designer has to have a hard conversation with the business person, and there's like a series of trade-offs that has to happen. So what I urge people from design backgrounds to try to do as they develop their careers is also to pay attention to the business milestones of startups, because it helps them understand how to talk to the business folks. Because oftentimes business folks are in la la land being like, we need to get to this profit milestone, and you're like, well, our product can't do that because and so I think it's really important to understand how to interface, like not only with engineering, because engineering is helping you build what you're doing, but as well as like build the communication partnerships with business so that you can achieve the problems together. I've seen them I've seen them come at odds oftentimes because the communication pattern isn't there and the language being used is not it's not forged. So it's sort of a business statement, but I would say that it's definitely something to pay attention to as you catch new gigs, and you'll see it happen. You'll see someone be like, we're going to slash that feature because it's not profitable, but it might be like one of the most efficient and effective things that the product is performing. So it's a pretty interesting negotiation. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm
Oh,
also. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Um,
oh yeah. Hi, RJ.
hey,
We
welcome
actually were in
everybody.
the same boot camp together. But I guess like what you just brought up is really interesting to me because right now I landed in product and I have been working for startups, mainly contracts since I graduated from my boot camp. And now it's like in my boot camp, it was like advocating for the users, but now in my role, I'm like advocating for like business value, for like user friendliness, and also just like feasibility. So it's like I'm like navigating a bunch of different things and not just the user.
Yeah.
Could you maybe talk about how you go about navigating all these different parts in like maybe like design art, maybe in just like what you've worked in?
A lot of it comes from the definition of what the company wants to solve, like what the company's ethos is. So if you're working at, for example, I was working at this agency in the past. I won't name the agency, but we had this idea that we wanted to build ethical technology, right? And so I worked in an agency where we would build software in 3-month, 6-month, year increments, and we had maybe like 4 or 5 projects happening at the same time. And so, a lot of it, when we would take on these clients, my job was to help them make sure that they had a North Star that all the features pointed to, right? So like, okay, we want to help, let's use my company example. Like we want to improve music education in the public school systems. So, what that means is like, well, do we need more users or do we higher quality education? Like, for example, there's a trade-off there. And we have to figure out as a team, or the leader of the company has to figure out what is the better trade-off. Like, and sometimes you can't raise money unless you help a lot of people. So like maybe the solution helps 200,000 people and this other solution helps 20,000 people. And the solution that helps 20,000 people is more effective, but the solution that helps 200,000 people helps you raise more money so you can stay alive. So there's different trade-offs that business has to make to keep people employed as well. And I think it's always the employee's job to keep the CEO in the hot seat to make sure that that North Star is right. And I've always been pretty bold in my career in making sure that I'm asking the CEO hard questions, because that means I care about the cause, right? And I think that's what product people should be doing. I think that's what the head of engineering should be doing, because I think that's what UI UX designers should be doing, to make sure that we're still on track and that our features are serving that main kind of company ethos or company goal, right? Obviously way more complex than that, but you have to kind of reverse engineer it from like, well, that's not serving our critical mission, but I want to say that with a caveat is that you still have to keep the lights on at a company. You still have to keep the lights on. You still have to keep people employed, or the whole thing you can have to go on hiatus and then half your employees leave. So there are trade-offs that business has to make to grow a technology company.
Yeah, that's a great question. And from what I've seen, I think the problem comes sometimes when these companies don't really even have a North Star. So it's tough being the like user advocate when it's not even like on their radar. I've experienced that with some startups, like they're not even at the point where they're thinking about the user. But I think it's kind of on the designer to find a way to like make that point or help them find a North Star,
Yeah.
ask them.
And I think a lot of it comes down through cross communication through management too. Like I'll find that in a company where a bit like often the business or head of sales or the CEO they're trying to make critical decisions that involve capital, because it's a resourcing problem, and then it's a production problem, right? And then it's an efficacy problem. And so they might be like, well, maybe we have a suite of 3 products, and product 1 is doing really well and it's going to keep the lights on, and then product 2 is like a better solution, but we have to invest another 2 years into it. So I think what happens is that's why I'm kind of harking on the idea that pay attention as much as you can if you're in the production side of things to what the business milestones are and why they are those things, because you can help inform the new business milestones. Oftentimes new business milestones are brought out of research that UI, UX, and engineers do. And if UI UX and you know, product and engineering are only just doing their job and not informing the business milestones, then there's a problem. There's definitely a problem, because then business is just operating in the dark, products operating in the dark, and you guys are just like hoping for the best. And so I think vocalizing and asking questions like, well, how come this business model won't work? And business can do the analysis and say, this is why it won't work. Well, then can we try a different thing to make it work, right? So I don't know. That's a tough thing in building any business, but that communication often, not communication, but that helping each other understand each other's problem sets, like understanding business problem sets, understanding product problem sets, not isolating and saying, this is only my job, I'm going to put on my blinders and do this. Because that sometimes, I would say sometimes that also yields resentment and like between departments where like people aren't communicating very well.
Yep. That's a great question. Does anyone else have any sort of questions they just want to bring up?
I have one question. I am a UX researcher from Columbus, Ohio.
Awesome.
And I recently got into the banking industry, and it's been great. I know our bank is they really care about the customers and employees, and everybody is on the same page with that. I'm usually working on the generative side of it, things like when we don't know what we don't know, so we need to go through the exploratory phase in order to find out where there's gaps and opportunities are. And oftentimes when I was doing the consultant on my own, I implemented this I found this framework called Futures Wheel. I don't know if you are familiar with that, but it's an interesting framework to work on. It basically is kind of asking you to put any event or changes that you want to make in the middle, and branching out from there. What's the next consequences that you're going to get by having some sort of life-changing event, and then what's the consequences after that, the first consequences, and then what's the next consequences after the second consequences. So we are able to understand what are the unintended consequences that we may encounter. We can even think about if there's any like zombie apocalypse happen, for example. It's never going to happen, but let's say it happens, like what are the things that and it kind of helps us to think about this future that we never thought that it was going to happen in the brainstorming phase. So those quick exercise always like helped us to kind of think through this problem that we were trying to solve in a little more long-term way. And I guess my question is there any other frameworks or kind of exercise that people can do during like brainstorming phase, or maybe in the middle of the project, so we can get reminded of all these unintended consequences?
And when you say people, do you mean, are we talking about a specific type of role?
That's a good question. I guess people who are working on projects to change. So it can really be anyone. It can be designers, it could be business folks, it can be, IT.
I love what you just said, because basically what that exercise is basically what's going through a CEO's head every single day. Like, that's giving you the 30,000 foot view. I mean, it's not clear, but like it's helping you get there, right? For example, like if we build feature one and it's working in this market and it's going to launch here, what is the next consequence what's the opportunity cost of us building feature one with 3 engineers and 2 designers? And we only have 3 engineers and 2 designers. What's the opportunity cost of us taking one designer and one engineer and building a second product at the same time and taking them off. Like those are great exercises for departments to do because it helps you come to the table with your analysis to be like, well, this is what the lay of the land is. And so those have to be aligned as you build a company or you grow a business or grow a software. And I think I love what the thing you just said in that exercise. And I think that similar exercise should be asked of the other groups to participate in. And honestly, it should be a team. I think that's a great, I think when I think folks that are in management that are like in charge of a build or maybe managing an engineering team or managing a design sprint, they should know the implications of what's going to happen, like on the options of implications that will occur. You know, it's very much like the conversation we were just having earlier. The thing I was speaking about earlier is like making sure that business is aligned, knowing like, well, product 1 is our Hail Mary, product 2 and 3 is our backup plan. Like, you know, can we do all 3 at the same time, or is that gonna tax our team? So I think forcing yourself to be like, what's the short-term implications of our activities? What's the midterm implications? What's the long-term? You're never going to know. Here's the one thing that's interesting about the businesses. You're never going to know what's going to happen. You rarely have optics in past 6 months. You have general control over a couple months, but what happens in month 4, 5, and 6, usually you're doing something completely different than you thought you would be doing in month 7. And so, but what the exercise helps you do is get better at predicting and get better at making decisions around research, resource allocation, user studies, focus on what part of the market you're trying to build software for. So basically the same concept, but apply it to all parts of the business and make sure that as many people at the organization have a general understanding of that as possible. Because then you'll know, then you'll be able to work with each other better, because it's all about teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work. Like if you have 10 people at a company and 3 people care about one thing, 3 people care about another thing, and 3 people care about another thing, and there's one person that's like steering it, that's not a good recipe for success. You guys all should care about the same thing, but you have expertise to help you get there. So I love that exercise that you just put out, the futures exercise.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's awesome. Thanks. And yeah, I'll just say what I've noticed after finishing the boot camp and getting out there into the real world is it's definitely, you know, a lot of people think of UX designers and designers as like, you know, just get this done. We just want this deliverable, where, you know, in your training, a lot of us have practiced really being invested in the outcome and the user satisfaction. And it's interesting when you realize like, oh, I'm part of a huge machine that might not really, you know, they just want to see the finished pages and that's it.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, it's important to find different things. The futures wheel I never heard of, but that's really cool. I'm going to check that out. Like different activities to just keep everyone on the same page. And I think the more concretely you can put forward your like findings, the better.
Yeah. No, I think I forgot, you know, I've been speaking in the context of small teams. So apologies for anyone who is here that's working on a larger team. But if you are working on a larger team, I would say ignite your curiosity for how the other departments work and how they make decisions. Because, you know, if you're working at the largest company I've worked at in the last couple of years was 40 big. And that actually was a shock for me, because then we had all these moving parts and all these decisions being made concurrently. And it was hard to keep up with why we were doing a thing. Like all of a sudden we were making cryptocurrency stuff. And I was like, wait, why are we doing that? Like, are we going to be able to be competitive in that? And there was reasons why, but I think what I'm getting at is like, if I go back, I knew that that event was happening, I needed to pursue the information inside the organization that lives inside the organization to understand why we were doing that. And then vocalize if there was a question that I had so I can do my job better to understand like where I can play as a role in that. And if I thought there's something that wasn't connected, surface that to the organization and say, hey, this isn't connecting for me. Can someone explain like why this is the case? And that's hard to do at a larger company. Um, but it can be done, of course.
Definitely. Great. That was awesome. Any other questions anyone wants to bring forward? Any topics? Before we end, I'd definitely like to get a little bit, you know.
I'm curious, as someone who's just going into the tech field and someone who went from music into tech, what are some things that you noticed initially that you should just paying attention to?
Well, I noticed that I should just pay attention to. I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Sorry. Like for instance, when I talked to someone else the other day and they mentioned that one of the things that they had to learn how to do was they had to like put aside their pride when creating. Is that something that you've had to do generally?
Oh, all day, every day.
Okay. I was assuming that would be true, but I just had to ask the creative person if that was true.
Well, I think it depends, it depends how you work. I mean, I think one thing, there's this book I just read called Managing, what is it called? Hold on. It's, the famous Peter Drucker book, Managing Oneself. This is written in 1950, I think, or something, but it still applies to today where understand what type of learner you are. Like, I know that I learn best by listening, auditory. And so for me, that's helpful. Like if I had this information when I was younger, I think I would be a little bit more effective because I can help, because I would get critical. I would sometimes get a little offended when people would critique some of my work, and maybe I wasn't doing it in the most effective. I wasn't executing the work in the most effective way. And I would say, learn how to take criticism. I mean, in art school, like critiques are pretty normal, but sometimes like in music, it's not as normal, being a musician. But definitely learn how to take critique, especially as a designer, because I know there's going to be times when you work on something for 5 hours and then someone's going to come in and be like, yeah, this isn't it. Can you try it again? And that definitely is a part of the game. But also, learn how to work on communicating your ideas and work on gathering as much information as you can, because and I keep harkening back to this curiosity thing, because the more information you gather in these type of fast moving work settings, the better your work will become, because you're informing the work that you're doing. And so your appetite should be very hungry. Like you should, like if you're building, let's say we're building like some sort of event-based platform, like we kind of want to just drink the Kool-Aid of that type of business as much as possible. Like educate, like the self-education. If you're entering in a new market, especially with UI UX designers, there's so much cross applicability, and all of a sudden you're working in ed tech, and now all of a sudden you're working in music tech, or you're working in fintech. You have to immerse yourself in that business, because that will inform why you need to design the thing in a better way. And that is just very much a thing where no one's going to give that to you. Especially in software and startups, you have to kind of get yourself acquainted with like how things were done and how new things are being created. And that's my best piece of advice. And that'll help you deal with the critiques as well as you develop your work, because you'll have backup to be like, hey, well, I was reverse engineering this problem set and I was informed by these decisions. And you can, because, not that critiques are wars, but sometimes like designers are right in their thinking, and then someone's coming in with a different perspective. but you need to be able to support why you built the thing you built and why it does that thing. So yeah, I don't know how helpful that is. I feel like whenever I end these sentences, I don't know if it's helpful at all. So please, please critique me.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said totally made sense. I think, yeah, it definitely seems like you can't be as attached to your work as you might a piece of music you made, because there's like totally different criteria. Whereas like music is like a feeling, and it's like you can't really tell someone that Picasso is a bad artist objectively. There's no way to define that. But
Yeah.
yeah,
But I do feel that there are objective qualities to music and how you get a feeling from music. Like, you know, there are objective things in creativity where you can support, like, you know, you can always flip it, but there's also ways to support from an objective standpoint why something works the way it does behaviorally, and how you can you're facilitating behavior. That's the whole part of like you know, I mean, I'm speaking to a bunch of UX UI designers and a bunch of folks there, but you know, the business is facilitating change, and software is facilitating behavior, helping someone get from point A to point B. And there has to be some level of agreement on how we facilitate that behavior. And so if you can back up the feature and say, like, you know, I got this person to get through the workflow or the user workflow in like 15 seconds instead of 30 minutes. Well, that's a good piece of evidence that you might be doing your job well if the job is if you're trying to optimize for speed, right? And that's what I mean. It's like building that criteria for yourself, because that criteria might not be defined for you as you're working with folks. So you have to define it for yourself. And that's the interesting thing about the ambiguous problem set is like, well, I need to build a drum beat because this thing doesn't feel like it's moving right now. So how is that the right move or not? Or maybe I put the drums in on the second verse. You know, it's building. You have to build the criteria for yourself, and then it takes you somewhere.
This is great. This is a great symmetry to the conversation, because, you know, we started off talking about getting the North Star, and now we're kind of bringing that back. And if you have your goals and you have like your objective measurements for what you're trying to do, then you can always like argue more for your what you've presented if you have the objective facts to back it up, which would kind of come from the North Star, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Sorry. Yeah, I just got it. We have a program running in Sacramento, and I just got a slew of text messages. But I will say that, you know, it's like there are going to be situations that, you know, depending on where y'all are in your career, and if you get hired for a gig and it's maybe a smaller team or a larger team, there are going to be situations where you're going to have projects that don't have definitions around success, and you're going to have to create them for yourselves. And that's where it's important to have dialogue with your colleagues to make sure that you're aligning the things that you create with the North Star and the vision. And so that is also the most challenging thing about working with a startup, is because it's such a moving target all the time that you got all these people defining things and like it goes this way and then it goes that way. And that's why the communication is being like, hey, am I accurate in saying that we need to get folks through this user flow in less than 2 minutes? Does that sound like a feasible thing? And someone says, who's working on another problem, said, well, that makes sense to me. And the other person in the other department says, that makes sense. And then business says, yeah, that's something we want. Well, then, you know, you can design something that facilitates that. Where if you find out in 3 of those conversations that that's not what people want, and they want people to have some more of like to spend longer time on the page, then you know that you might be inaccurate with your initial thought. So it's kind of like doing your homework and then talking about it in a way.
And I think you did a good thing there, which was you framed it in a non-confrontational way. Like, oh, am I correct? Is it accurate to say that blah, 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 blah? Because I think that's the issue too, is everyone kind of has, a lot of people have their own ideas about what's going on. And when you kind of challenge it or present something new, I think a lot of people have like an immediate defensive reaction. So like
yeah, it's challenging. It gets really sensitive because we're talking about creativity here. We're talking about people putting their blood, sweat, and tears into their work, and we're talking about building things out of thin air. So there's a lot of effort that goes into these projects. And I will say that we have to kind of remind ourselves that we're always going to be students of like this North Star, right? Um, we're always going to be students, and I think I'm trying professionally in my career to try to come into scenarios that are challenging and ask myself and ask the people around me, is it accurate to say that this is what we want to do? And like trying to do that for myself, because it's challenging when you're like might have like 5 months left of funding and you have to complete something and get it into the market. You have to kind of I feel like there's challenging moments professionally where you have to like, you might be under some stress, but you have to have an honest conversation, but you also have to know that you're going in the right direction because it has implications for the company. So it's a little bit of firmness, but it's also a lot of humility in asking your colleagues, hey, am I right in saying this? And can I learn more about what you're doing so it can inform what I'm doing?
Yeah, that's great advice. Does anyone have any more questions? This one really flew by. I think we have about 5 minutes left. And if not, I definitely want to hear, Greg, your thoughts, your most out there visions of trends in the future. Where do you think we're going to be in 10 years?
It's so funny. Like I kind of want to connect you all to Rick, my friend Rick. He plays synthesizers in my band, but he's also he was one of the head designers at Splice. And he's at Teachable, and now he's moving to Output, which is I don't know if you guys are familiar with Output, but Output builds software and instruments. And I was like, Rick, you would be perfect for this talk because
we gotta get him.
He literally works on music software and is an incredible musician. He went to UM for piano. And but anyway, what I would say is what I'm starting to see in the market, and my job like now is mainly like business design. It involves building software, but it's more on business design now. But I would say being on the business end and having more of like trying to obtain a 30,000 foot view of like where business is heading. I would say that obviously technology is it's on the up. There's going to be a lot more hiring in technology. There's going to be a lot more expectations. There's a couple. Automation is obviously inevitable, and as automation increases, jobs are going to be replaced. But what that means is the types of design work and the types of business design work you want to be a part of is essentially making sure that you're a part of, like, you're helping yourself get to a place professionally where you're informing how the technology works. Because frameworks are always going to come out, but making sure that you're in a place where you can understand the strategic, you understand what execution and strategy mean in the bounds of what you're doing, because execution often happens as a result of strategy. And so I would say where technology is going is there's going to be more strategy based thinking jobs with execution associated with them. And there's naturally going to be less execution jobs. Like folks that used to build Squarespace type websites 15 years ago are not doing that anymore. And that's a pretty quick curve. It's a very quick curve. And so what I would, urge people to think about is like keeping themselves abreast of new technology and keeping themselves abreast of why that technology is used and how it's being used in confines of business. Well, and it's not always a business problem either. It's like you could be independently wealthy and have to design, an incredible, like you have to design a solution for a city that is accessible at all points. Like there's that too. But what I will say though, is being a professional in this space, I know my conversation sounds like some sort of super objective one, but like the folks that get to solve the problems oftentimes like have an understanding of how to execute it, but can generate the strategy as well and have an understanding of it. And so I think there's going to be a lot more strategy jobs coming up as we gain more tools to create technology. So,
wow, yeah, that is great. The Squarespace, that really did kind of obliterate a whole, sect of website builders in like about 10 years. That's I never really thought
yeah,
about that.
but I want to shed positive light in that all the problems that we have to solve are human and design. They're mostly design problems, whether they're business problems, UI, UX, like engineering, like learning how to code is an important skill set, but we're finding that there are engineering frameworks that are being built that can solve problems, immediately, that designers get to use those frameworks to solve problems, and they're using design thinking to do that. So what I'm getting at is that designers using strategy and using, design thinking and then utilizing tools. And so if you can understand the strategy and the execution and then use the strategy to inform the execution, you're going to generally be in a decent spot than someone who only wants to be executing. And that's my kind of opinion. I'm sure you'll have some other people that come on here and talk about some different concepts, but that's where I sit. I've seen that to be helpful, and I see that's where things are going. And in the next 5 years, I think it's going to happen pretty fast, actually. Just the curve is just like incredible. How tall it is. I mean, how steep it is.
Yeah. Great. Well, Greg, thanks, man. This has been awesome.
I hope it was helpful.
Yeah.
This is like, it's been a while since I've done one of these, so thanks for having me on. And actually, I have a friend in LA who has a design agency, and he's looking for junior designers. So if I'm gonna put my email in here, and so if y'all have resumes or are looking for a gig or are looking to send your resume around he's a really talented UI UX designer, and he's looking for like more of a junior designer to help him finish and help him complete some client projects. So he's like really great friend of mine. He's also a fantastic musician. I'm gonna put mine in here. It's gmatthewsnyc@gmail.com. And I'll take a look at what you got and pass it along. And hopefully I didn't say any bogus stuff on this interview or this talk.
No, man, it was great. Seriously, thank you for coming, everyone. We'll have another one next month. I'm actually not sure who the guest will be. Maybe we'll see if Rick can come, because I love outputs. Plugins.
Yeah, Rick would totally do it. I'll connect y'all after this, but yeah, and shout out to RJ. He's also an incredible music producer.
Thanks, man.
And I'm really pumped to, one thing I will say is like keep engaging all your creative pursuits, because it's always gonna sharpen everything that you do. I think that type of thinking, I've seen some incredible people make great decisions, and they had it in a completely different background maybe 2 years before, and the perspective is really important. So it's a joy to be here and chat with you all. So thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks for contributing and great questions. And yeah, it's awesome. I mean, we had Carl from Ireland. That's awesome. Toronto in the building. Yeah. So I will send out a little recap for everyone who wasn't able to make it. And yeah, I'll see you guys in March if you guys want to come back.
Awesome. This is so cool. Thanks, guys. Nice to meet y'all.